Picture this. It's 1999, and the world is reeling from the tragedy at Columbine High School. In the aftermath, everyone's looking for someone or something to blame. Enter video games, specifically Doom and Quake, two games the shooters reportedly played. Suddenly, video games are public enemy number one. Politicians are holding hearings, parents are panicking, and the media is having a field day. But here's the question, were video games really to blame? Let's start with the science. Over the past 2 decades, researchers have conducted hundreds of studies on the effects of violent video games. Organizations like the American Psychological Association and Oxford University have weighed in, and the consensus is clear. There's no causal link between violent games and real-world violence. In fact, some studies suggest that gaming can actually reduce stress and improve mood. But wait, you might say, what about all those headlines linking games to aggression? Well, here's the thing. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Sure, some aggressive people play violent games, but that doesn't mean the games made them aggressive. It's like saying everyone who drinks water will eventually drown. It just doesn't hold up. Now let's talk about the real culprits. Mental health issues, access to firearms, and social environments are far more significant factors in real-world violence. Yet these topics are often ignored in favor of the easier, more sensational narrative. Why? Because blaming video games is convenient. It's a way to avoid addressing the harder, more uncomfortable truths. But here's the twist. Video games might actually be part of the solution. Games like Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice tackle mental health issues head-on, while This War of Mine explores the moral complexities of war. These games don't just entertain, they educate and provoke thought. So what's the takeaway? Video games aren't the problem. They're a medium, just like books or movies, and like any medium, they can be used for good or bad. The real issue is how we, as a society, choose to address the root causes of violence. Let's rewind a bit further. The idea that media causes violence isn't new. In the 1950s, comic books were blamed for juvenile delinquency. In the 1980s, it was heavy metal music. And in the 1990s, video games became the latest scapegoat. After Columbine, politicians like Joe Lieberman held hearings, and the media ran wild with stories about how Doom and Quake were crime simulators. But here's the kicker. The shooters didn't even play those games as much as the media claimed. In fact, one of them reportedly preferred Super Mario Bros. The truth is, this myth persists because it's easy. It's easier to blame a video game than to address systemic issues like mental health care, gun control, or bullying. And let's be honest, it makes for a great headline. Video games cause violence sells way more papers than complex societal issues require nuanced solutions. Now let's dive deeper. One of the most cited studies linking video games to aggression is from Craig Anderson, a psychologist who claimed that violent games increase aggressive thoughts and behaviors. But here's the problem. His studies were often criticized for methodological flaws, like using non-standardized measures of aggression. For example, asking participants to blast loud noises at others. On the flip side, researchers like Dr. Christopher Ferguson have conducted meta-analyses of hundreds of studies and found no significant link between violent games and real-world violence. In fact, Ferguson's research suggests that any short-term increase in aggression after playing a violent game is about the same as what you'd see after playing a competitive sport. And let's not forget the global perspective. Countries like Japan and South Korea, where gaming is a national pastime, have some of the lowest violent crime rates in the world. Meanwhile, the US, where this myth thrives, has a much higher rate. If video games were the problem, wouldn't the numbers tell a different story? So if video games aren't to blame, what is? Let's start with mental health. Many perpetrators of mass violence have a history of untreated mental illness. Yet, access to mental health care remains a significant issue in many countries. Then there's access to firearms. The US has more guns than people, and studies show a clear link between gun availability and gun violence. But instead of addressing this, politicians often point to video games as the problem. Finally, there's the social environment. Bullying, isolation, and a lack of community support can all contribute to violent behavior. But again, these issues are harder to tackle than blaming a video game. Here's where things get interesting. Video games might actually be part of the solution. Some games don't just entertain, they educate and provoke thought. Even competitive games like League of Legends or Overwatch can teach valuable skills like teamwork, communication, and problem solving. And let's not forget the rise of esports, which has created opportunities for millions of players around the world. So what's the takeaway? Video games aren't the problem. The real issue is how we, as a society, choose to address the root causes of violence. Before you go, don't forget to drop a comment. Let's keep the conversation going.